Hi, and welcome to Gen Friends. We're so excited to have you here. I've got a great panel. I'm Cheri Hudson-Passy from Carolina Girl, and this lovely panel we have Terry O'Connell from the In-Depth Genealogy. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Cheri. How are you?
I'm good. I just want to let everybody know we're having some technical issues tonight, so if we fade in and out, we're really sorry, and it's my fault tonight, so I'm the one having technical issues, but we're going to try to get through because we've got some fun things to talk about. And with us tonight, back from her hiatus, is Melissa Barker, the archive lady. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, Cheri. Hello, Terry. Great to be back. It's been crazy the last few months, but hopefully I can be back now for a while.
Oh, we're glad. We're glad. Well, what we wanted to talk about tonight are the last two episodes that they showed of Who Do You Think You Are? It was Regina King and Matthew Morrison. So we're going to get started with Regina King, who I think is funny because when she started her journey, she asked, believe it was her son, and they said, she says, what do you want me to find? And he says, I want to find out where we are related to Martin Luther King. So it's interesting as we go through the story how there turns out to be a connection. The cool thing was that they had a genealogist come speak to her that we all know and love.
Yes, yes.
That was so fun. Anybody want to talk about who that? Yes.
She is awesome.
She is awesome. It was so fun to see somebody that I've spoken to. It's kind of, whoa, she did a great job. And her responsibility was to get the ball rolling. What did she want to learn about? And she got her onto Ancestry. And the first thing they did is they started with a Social Security index. So with that Social Security index, they could go back a next generation because that lists usually, not always, but usually will list the parents. So that put them back another generation. And so they ended up with a man named Moses, was it Claiborne, I want to say, or no? And he had an AKA, which was Hughes.
Yes.
Which was
the AKA.
Yes. Yeah, he had an AKA. So he was going by, which she was saying is very prevalent in research. So that was nothing to be because they were coming out of slavery and they were choosing names, and he also probably did it too because he kept some run-ins with the law that I believe was not his fault. It was the times. He was trying to get people to register to vote, and he was head of some organizations, and some of those people in the South, in Alabama, did not like that at all. There was an interesting census that she found when he was 70 years old, and he was married, and he had all these children, one of which was her grandmother, and she was like, whoa, he started, really, really old. My first thought was, there must have been another wife. Did anybody else think that?
I thought that too. Because I have something kind of like that in my family, and it was multiple wives, and so.
Exactly. So that was my first thought, was I don't know that he started, later in life. I believe there must have been another way somewhere. Anybody want to go on from that? What happened after that? What kind of information did you find out about him in the census records? Where was he? As they went back one more decade, where was he? He was incarcerated.
Wasn't he?
Jail.
Yes, jail. That's right. Yeah. And
he was incarcerated. And so her question then was, how to get there? Why was he there? And so they found some very interesting records they could look. They went into court records. They went to newspaper records.
Yes.
And I thought I love newspapers. And tip that I thought came out of that was, who was running that newspaper? Who was in charge of the news going into that newspaper? And when they looked it up, because there was reports of her ancestor fighting with a white man, and it turned out that the editor of that newspaper was really one of the founders of the KKK. So what is in that area? So what does that tell you? It's not going to be, it's not going to be fair news whatsoever. Right. It's going to be biased. Completely biased.
If you read any amount, I mean, like large amounts of newspapers, like I do, and I know Cheri does, and I don't know about Cheri, but if you do, you can actually kind of figure out or have a feeling when you're reading certain newspapers. Especially, I have a family that's lived in the particular place in Ohio since just about the day they got off the boat, which I know we're not in Ohio, but anyway, when they got there, they stayed there forever. And so the newspapers are just rich with their history because they've been there forever and they were very active in the community. But when you read some of these stories, and not obituaries, but just the stories, and you can actually see the skew of the editorial staff if you read enough of them. But this was a great reminder to us all that, when you're reading newspapers and you're reading, let's just like she found these newspaper articles about her ancestor. If you find newspaper articles about your ancestor, other than, the obituaries, it would be probably a good thing to look into the editorialship of the newspaper just to see how if it's, skewed in any which way.
And especially when it's this type of story, when it's more than, a farm report, or, they went to visit that person. But this type of story where they're reporting on a physical altercation in the street, and the language that was used, the disrespectful language that was used towards her ancestor, where is this coming from? And it even said in one of the articles that despite what other people about this altercation, this is really what happened. And it was their, skew on what had happened. And it was because they were after him. And they, in fact, put him on what they call the blacklist. So those were African Americans in the community that they wanted community that was reading that paper to know, don't trust, don't give them jobs, don't support them at all in anything they're trying to do. And I guess that's, where we get that term from, which is it's just a horrible thing that he was put.
It conjured up some thoughts, not exactly the same, of course, but I think we are all not old enough to have lived it, but old enough maybe to have read about it in maybe school history or just history in general. Back in the 50s, 1950s, and when they were calling everyone communists, and especially like in Hollywood, when they blacklisted actors and actresses because they were considered communist. So blacklisting people is very powerful. And everybody reads the newspaper. That's one thing about, I always try to help younger genealogists today to understand the newspaper back then was it. It was like our news channels today, or our, whatever we look at for news on our phones. It was the newspaper. And
social media. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And they could sway opinion like crazy about what they printed in the newspaper and how they printed it, just like the blacklist, like we're talking about.
Exactly.
Imagine you're on the blacklist, you can't get a job, you can't, you can't do anything, and how that would affect you and your family trying to provide for your family as a man, trying to get a job, provide, you're just trying to make it your way in life, and then it's printed in the newspaper.
Exactly. Well, one of the sad things that she found out was that the KKK, in fact, came after him. And they came into where they were living, and they couldn't find him. They couldn't find Moses, so they shot his wife. So
and the reason that they talked about why it kind of shocked me, because I'm still, you don't mess with women. It just was such a respect, even for African American women. But they did it to kind of get him to come out. And I thought,
and a message to anybody else that they were looking. You don't run away, because we will get your family. So it was a message. And so, he lost his first wife. And so her ancestor, Mary, was in fact the second wife. So, it's just sad to have to read that um, and know and she said, even 150 years later, I am angry reading this. I'm angry is what she said. So he did end up going, well, yeah. Oh, go ahead. What'd you say? Maybe I misunderstood what you said.
I just said, how could you not be angry? It's like infuriating.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. The injustice of it all it's ridiculous. So she did find out through court records, which I also liked because there isn't any more online. So I'm going to go to the courthouse and look to see if I can find things. So just because something isn't available online doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We need to go local. We need to actually look for records and repositories. And they came back and they were able to find where he had in fact gone to jail, served 2 years in the penitentiary for assaulting the alleged assault on this man. And that was, I think he went to jail like 4 months after they had shot and killed his wife. So, and I thought another interesting point that was brought out was, why did he only get 2 years? Why? He assaulted a white man, and back in those days, why did he, and it was attempted murder. So why did he only get 2 years? And she said, so you look at the jury and you look at the judge. And I thought that was great. We need to look beyond. We need to see the whole picture, the whole setting. The jury was not his peers, of course, and I'm sure they were feeding into, all the on, but the judge, they said, and he understood what was going on, and so he only sentenced him to the 2 years. So I think that we need to look at all facets of a document and a story when we get it.
This is a great example, what you're talking about, of the fan club, that we've talked about a lot, or cluster research, as sometimes it's called, because, when you're looking at a legal document, and let's just say it lists the jurors or it lists the judge's name, many times we just kind of, okay, well, that's the judge, that's okay. But if you're looking into the judge or to the jurors and that aspect of it, look at how it shines a different light on that whole process. And it tells a more complete story. And aren't we trying to tell our ancestors' story? And so I always encourage genealogists, any name that's on a document, a witness name or anything, look into it. It may be just a neighbor, or it may not be anybody that actually had anything hands-on to do with it, but look into it, because you just don't know what kind of story you're going to find.
No, absolutely. Well, his story really took a turn after he got out of jail. And it turned out that he became a preacher. And not only did he become a preacher, but he was affiliated with the Baptist congregation there, and was he helped begin some of the organizations of the churches coming together, and actually ended up being a forerunner of the church that Martin Luther King preached in. And so there wasn't a direct family connection to Regina, but just that her ancestor was part of that process that led down to him, I think it was just wonderful for her to see that connection, that because of the things that he did once he got out of jail and started the Baptist convention in the area, or the groups that fed into the Baptist convention in the area, that church became part of that as well. And then Martin Luther King was preaching there. So that to me was really cool. So at least she found her connection. She found her connection.
I kind of looked at it as like he kind of helped to lay some groundwork so that Martin Luther King could come on the scene and do the great things that he did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's always wonderful to see that happening, that your ancestor was part of something like that. So does anybody have anything else that they want to mention about this episode before we move on to the Matthew Morrison?
I just want to say, like with Regina King, it was fascinating to watch her because, you know, we watch all these celebrities go through this process, and some of them either they have little interest, and she was really just intrigued by everything. She asked a ton of questions. You could see her, you know, wiping the tears away from her eyes as
Yes.
learned things. So it was really great to see her have that real full connection to it. I mean, we know it, we do it. We go to these places our ancestors have been, and you know, you have that heavy breath and you just kind of like soak it all in. But we got to actually see that with her.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was such an emotional story. And I'm glad that it had a happy ending for her, because I mean, he suffered a lot. And one of the points that they made was he didn't leave, he didn't run. He stayed. And then he ended up being quite an influencer in his community. And so, I mean, the whole time he was an influencer in his community, you know, and that was part of the reason they were after him, is because he was influencing the community. But he didn't run. He stayed, and he continued even after he got out of jail and had a large family. So, had a very large family.
I thought about his children. I mean, I know that she talked about her grandmother, but I thought about his children and the historic time that they lived in and how they watched their father do what he did. I would love to be able to talk to his children's children's children to see just what he's passed down and what they remember, or what they, you know what I'm saying? Because you know, they had to have grown up and gotten to a certain point where they realized just that they were, you know, front row seats to his history being made.
To history. Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I thought it was a wonderful story. They brought in a lot of different documents, Freedmen's Bureau, you know, records, the letter from, and just court records and newspapers and Social Security indexes. They brought in a lot of different types of records that people can use when they're, it's not just, you know, your birth, death, marriage, and oh, I can't find anything else. There's so much out there. So we need to move on. We're going to talk about the Matthew Morrison, and you know, I was excited about this one because he ended up going to Charleston. So I was very happy that he ended up going to Charleston. But he really wanted to know. He said he wanted to be able to pass on stories to his son, and that got me excited because, you know, that's what he wanted to know. And he said he was very interested in American history. And so he was really, they did his DNA and were showing him his DNA circles and the settler, you know, where the people settle, those settler groups. And one was in the Northeast, and they said, so you probably got a lot of, you know, early American, you know, people there. And then you've got these ones from the South. And so in my mind, he's probably thinking, oh, Revolutionary War people up north, you know. And then they send him to Charleston. He does have a Revolutionary War soldier in his family, but he was a loyalist. Oh, I have talked to people before that, they're a loyalist. But, you know, again with everything, and he said this as well, we don't know what we would have done. And really, I learned some things in this episode that I wasn't aware of, and I live in South Carolina, and I know about the 96th district where he was from. And the loyalists from that region was because they didn't trust the government in Charleston. I didn't realize that makes so much sense because they really weren't taking care of the people in the back country. So they go to Charleston. And he's walking down those streets. I'm like, oh, why wasn't I there when they were filming this? Why wasn't I at the library when he was in the library? That would have been really cool. I have to say that they were in the Historical Society, and the records aren't there anymore. They've moved them. So I don't know when they filmed this, but they're now at the College of Charleston. They're in their library. And so, but they may have just used that building for, I have not been in the building since they redid it, and then they moved all the records over. So I'm not sure what's there. They have just filmed there because it might have been a bigger space. And it's a nicer, more historic looking building on the outside. So it was better on camera, is what I'm thinking. Unless this was filmed a long time ago. So anyway, so I was excited to have him go and go to the archives and look at the things that they had and learn the story. And he found out that he had, well, first he didn't know that he was a loyalist. And it wasn't until they found records of other people. And that's another good clue, I think, for people to understand is our ancestors may never have written a journal. They may have never recorded their war experiences. They may have never told anybody their stories, but other people were there. And if you read their diaries and their letters, their journals, their papers, your ancestor may be named in them. And that's what happened in this case. I don't think there wasn't a single record that his ancestor wrote. It was all, and it was Lindley was his last name, James. He didn't have a death date for him. He only knew he was from South Carolina. That's really all he knew. And started discovering through other people's records that he'd fought as a loyalist in the Revolutionary War.
This reminded me of going back to another episode of Who Do You Think You Are in season 2 when they did Tim McGraw. And they found Tim McGraw's ancestor in George Washington's diary, mentioned only once because he was a neighbor.
Yes.
And, and that's why I'm always trying to hammer home to genealogists, look at other people's records in the archives, especially diaries, scrapbooks.
Oh, yes.
And things like that, because like I said, I have a hard time finding stuff on my family. I do not know why my families didn't leave a paper trail, but they didn't. So now I'm looking at other people that were, neighbors, friends, went to school with them, whatever, any kind of connection, and looking at their records. It's extra work, but you know what? It is very rewarding when you find that piece.
Oh, it pays off. Yeah, yes. It pays off. And in this case, it paid off. They found out that he was a captain. He was indeed from the 96th district, which is the upper part of South Carolina towards the Georgia area. It was the back country. It was the frontier. These families were given. The British wanted South Carolina populated, and nobody was really going over to that area because of the Native American population, and there was a lot of fighting going on, but they were saying, hey, you go, we'll give you free land. And so they were, for land, they were getting people to move out there. And so since they weren't being taken care of, they felt, by the government in Charleston, they were supporting the British. And his ancestor was actually in charge of one of the lists that was being made. Okay, here we are. Who's, going to support the British and who are going to support the Patriots? And they had a list, and he was ended up captured. And interestingly enough, he went to jail, but he got out of jail. How did he get out of jail? Do y'all remember?
No.
He had to sign something. He had to sign an oath.
An oath, yeah.
Allegiance.
He had to sign the oath, and he was converted. He joined the Patriots. No, he went right back to the 96th district, and he started out there. And one of the documents actually said that that's what he was doing. He was a rebel rouser and causing trouble, and then he had to escape. And they thought maybe he had gone because that's where all to try to, because the British were still heavily in that area, and they could skirt out of South Carolina. And so they were trying to figure out what happened to him. After he was arrested and then got out of jail, 6th district, and then he disappeared and they couldn't find him anymore. So they went to another historian. You need to now go to Georgia. Goes to Georgia, and he goes to a battlefield, an historic battle for Georgia. And there, it turns out he had brought men from the 6th district. There were also men from the same district that were fighting this battle, that were fighting on the Patriot side. And so this happens in every war. You've got brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. They had, and how do you tell? I mean, when you're, battles, were they all in uniform? Probably not. Some probably were. Some were just militiamen because they were all at one point by law had to be part of the militia. How are they distinguishing? There's my cousin. Where's he fighting now? Do I shoot at him? Do I not? I can't even imagine. What happened. I don't know if either of you have been to one of those battlegrounds before and walked through it, but it's kind of an eerie thing. There's one. I'm from I was born in South Carolina, and there's a big Revolutionary battle in Camden, and there is a battleground that they've kept and preserved. And you walk there, and it is kind of eerie to think about the men screaming and running and shooting and dying, and right there on that field. It's just an interesting place to be.
I've not been on a battlefield for the Revolutionary War, but I lived 20 minutes from the Battle of Fort Donelson from the Civil War. And we've been there many times. My husband's great-great-great-grandfather was with the Confederacy, with the 49th Tennessee, and my great-great-grandfather was with the 49th Ohio at the same battle.
Wow!
And it's of course a state park, and so they have all of the maps and things of where each unit was, and so you can really track it down. Yes. They have it by hour of where everything was.
Wow!
So we could find where his ancestor was, which his ancestor was down by the waterfront, which is the Cumberland River, which is right on the battlefield. So and they have cannons there now, and you can walk there and you can see it, and you could just feel. It's just you can't describe that feeling unless you've just been there.
Yeah, it is different. It's just a real. You can't even explain it. It's just a very It's a very interesting feeling. This was the Kettle Creek battlefield, is what they said it was, a Kettle Creek battlefield. And what I thought was interesting is this battle. They have a event for the Patriots with the names of who fought there. But recently he was saying, because there's nothing there, for the Loyalists who died, who fought and died there. But they said recently they've had archaeologists come, and they've been able to find some of the graves, and they've got white crosses on them now. So at least, their names aren't there, but at least there's some memorial for them. There's some remembrance of these men that died, because like he said, they were fighting for what they believed in. We're glad that they didn't win, because we wouldn't be the country that we are now. That didn't make them evil people. They were, we've talked about this so many times. We don't know what we would have done. We don't know what our choices would have been. We don't know. It's all based on political things and financial things and things like that. And so we can't judge, but we can honor and reverence the battle and the men who died on these battlefields. So they did that. So then he's like, well, what was next? Because we don't have any proof that he died here. He still doesn't have a death date. So they sent him back to the 96th district, to the historical site that is 96. I don't know why they call it 96. I just know it's the 96th. I don't know why. It's a weird name, and I've always wondered. I don't know. Maybe somebody can put in the comments and go, duh, you live in South Carolina and you don't know why it's called 96. I don't have any ancestors in there, so I haven't done any real deep, researching in that district. But so they send him back to the historical area where, everything used to be. And they do have a document that shows that his ancestor ended up in the jail, which did you see the spelling of jail? It was the GAOL. Yeah, and they had to tell him, no, that says jail. So, because he thought it said goal. But so we need to be careful with that old handwriting and the old words and the way things were written, to make sure we're understanding our documents. But he was put in jail with some other loyalists, and then they were hung. So now he's got a death place and a death date. And they said that there were some writings from one of the other loyalists that said they could see the gallows being built. and the graves being dug before they took them out. I can't even imagine. Can you imagine looking out the window and knowing that that's your fate, and he left, 5 children. So, I wonder what happened to his poor widow. According to the chart, the tree, they thought she died in about 1880, I think it was, and that was 1779 that he was hung. So I don't know where, that date came from, or if she just, who knows, what happened with that, or if they rounded up the families and did something to the families of the loyalists. I don't know. But how sad. It was kind of a sad ending to that story. I mean, he found that death date, and they can add that to the tree, but a sad ending, a very, very sad ending to that story. But you know what? There's not a lot of happy endings to war stories.
True.
There really aren't.
Sure.
I mean, even if you were on the winning side, it's still sad. I mean, people are, people die.
And there's not always, happy endings to our ancestor stories either.
Exactly.
And it's important it's important as genealogists for us to tell every one of them, whether they're happy or sad or indifferent or what they are, because it's the story.
Whether they made him because you think, oh my gosh, my ancestor. There are a lot of people that I have talked to that are embarrassed because their ancestors are loyalists. Like, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. That's just the way it was. You don't know why they chose that. They chose it for a reason, and they chose it for a reason. They fought for it. He left his family, he left his community, he left everything to fight. And so, he had that in him, and he kept doing it. Even when he signed the oath, he could have just said, okay, I don't want to jeopardize my life. I don't want to jeopardize anything anymore. I'm just gonna, okay, I'll do whatever you want me to do. But by signing that oath, that meant that if they wanted to send him to fight with the Patriots, he would have to do it, whatever, because he now had said that he was going to be a loyal person to the Patriots. And so I think that was interesting. And, I think we've got a lot of documents like that during war where we'll say, oh, you know what, our ancestor, they turn themselves around and they sign that loyalty oath. Doesn't mean a thing.
No.
Doesn't mean a thing. They'll sign anything to save their own lives and to get out of there, and then they just go right back to what they were doing to begin with. So whatever side they're fighting for, But there were some really interesting documents in this, and I really liked that they were in archives, and they were looking at letters, and they were looking at manuscript collections, and they were, again, look at other things. Don't just look for records of your ancestor, because they could be mentioned, and they don't have to always be, say, the captains or the generals or the whatever for somebody else to mention them, because one of those letters talked about they were after the ancestor and his friends because they were really the troublemakers, and they had names of some of the kind of underlings that they weren't going to deal with. So maybe your ancestor was one of those people that didn't have a big title, but they were mentioned in that document. So I think a lot of us get, oh, we don't have any famous ancestors, or nobody had money in my family, or you never know where you're going to find their names. You just never know. So you need to look everywhere. Anybody else got anything else they want to mention about this episode?
I just want to say, I think it was good to show the other side of the war. Most of the stuff we see on these TV shows, it's always about, quote unquote, our side.
Exactly.
I know that there's been a couple where they've showed the loyalists, but it was really cool to kind of see the other end of it.
Exactly. And he said that too. He said, I have a better understanding of this war now. A much better understanding of why people did what they did since I've come on this journey. And so I think that's another why it's not only from their experiences, but everything that was going on around, we need to research and learn about is the history and what was going on that might make our ancestors make the decisions that they made. So with that, thank you, ladies. those last 2 episodes of Who Do You Think You Are. Thanks so much for talking to King and Matthew Morrison. And with that, we'll say bye, and we'll see you next time on Gen Friends.
Bye.
Bye.